entered the military in 1975. I'm sorry, 1976. And I served 28 years as a chaplain, and I got out in 2004. When I was in college, there was a person who was selling drugs at the school I was at, and he lived off campus, and it was a reorganized Latter-day Saint church college, so it wasn't, I don't think people even realized he was doing that, but he was a Vietnam vet. And I walked in to get him, and he had a band, and I was going to ask him if his band would do music for us for a dance, because I was a senator for my house. And a friend of his and he were pretending to be Native Americans because they were studying, and then they were all dressed up that way, and they're going, oh, and they took a knife, and this guy cut his finger open, blood was spurting out and everything. And so I just walked up and I said, can I stop the bleeding on your hand? And he said, sure. And I prayed with Ezekiel 16:6 with him and said, and I passed by thee, and I saw thee polluted in thine own blood, and I said unto thee, whence thou wast in thy blood, live. And it immediately stopped bleeding, and he just kept looking at his hand. And it was quite a time after that, he came up to me and he asked me what I had done to him. And I said, I don't know what you mean. And he says, I didn't know this, but he was the biggest drug dealer on campus. And he says, ever since you stopped the bleeding on my hand, I can't sell the drugs anymore. And I said, well, can you answer one question honestly? And he said, yes. And I said, didn't you want to be free of that immoral activity? And he says, yes, but there's no way you could have known that. And I said, but God knew that. And so after that, he moved out of where he was living with these off-campus guys, and he moved on. It was a reorganized Latter-day Saint church college, so he moved on campus. They got him a place to work and everything. And he says, why is it that you even believed you could help me? And I said, because wherever you would see him, he had a dog, Missy. And he would take Missy and hold it right up to his heart and everything. And I said, you need to understand, that's the man you are, not a drug dealer. And he said, I get it now. That story was so unusual that it got through a lot of people in our churches. And we're a lay tradition, so we don't have elders or anything like that. But we've always had military chaplains. And so the word got to Boston, to our mother church. And so they called me and asked me if I would interview for their chaplain training program. And so I said, well, I guess I could, but no woman had done that at that point. And women were just being allowed to go in the military. So I just felt like, God was directing me, this is where you're going to go. Boston University School of Theology is what our church uses, because we don't have our own college that is graduate school, because you have to have 3 years of graduate studies, Masters of Divinity, to get in the military as a chaplain. And so that's why you had to go to Boston to get in that program. And it's wonderful because Boston University gives chaplains, military chaplains, full tuition free. So that was also a really good part of that. So when I went in the Army as a chaplain, there were 4 of us that were chaplains, that were women, and I think it was about 256 men. And it was, I'm going to talk about this in my talk, but most of the men were not thinking women should still be in the military yet. And so in the first 5 years I was spit on, I had my tropical fish poisoned, I was run off the road by men in stocking masks, and I mean, it's just one thing after another. And yet you also dealt with people who appreciated your intelligence, and it was interesting because people would say, I've talked to other chaplains, but they just rah, 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 whatever. And I feel like when I talked to you, I got an answer of peace for what I was worried about. Because you're assigned to a unit, you do anything that any chaplain would do. There isn't any difference between what a chaplain does for any unit, because you're just doing the religious services that they need. And and trying to make sure that everybody's religious needs that are in that unit are met. And examples would be if you had a Jewish person, then you had to find out who could come and get them, or what would be the closest place they could go to worship on Sundays, because there many times wasn't a rabbi there was very few rabbis in the military too. So your job was to make sure whatever assignment you were given, all the people that you had the coverage for, you had to make sure all of them were getting their military religious needs met. Because in the military, all they have is a Catholic program and a Protestant program. And in very large places, they sometimes had a Jewish program. But otherwise, people would have to locate what was the closest military, or to that military area, what were the closest places that they could go for that traditions place, if they had like Seventh-day Adventist or something like that. The first big warfighter exercises we had in Germany, they only had a place where one humongous room where everybody had to stay at night and sleep, and so they had all these double bunk beds, and it was a whole long building. And because they had only 2 women there, I would had a bunk bed at clear other end because I was the officer, and all the other officers that were men at the other end. And the funniest thing I thought had ever happened was the first morning when we woke up, one of the guys who was clear down at the other end yelled as loud as he could across all of those areas down to where I was, and he said, "Chaplain Horton, you look like," and I'm going to clean this up, "Hades in the morning." So I kind of sat up in my bed and I yelled back down and I said, "So what's your excuse for the rest of the day?" All the guys they just started going, "Ooh, you thought you were going to get her, she got you." So little things, but it was kind of like your big brother, teasing the little sister or something. I thought it was the best experience I've ever had, even though, being spit on and some of that kind of stuff. But it was I always found if you met the hatred with love, it could be dissolved. And so to me, it was very uplifting in that, and it changed people's minds because they were still wrestling with the whole idea of women being in the military. So to me, I felt like you had an opportunity to help people see that women weren't really limited. So that's the best way I know how to taught our new trainees. Even after I retired, then additional 12 years, I did the teaching that our church wanted to have done specifically for military chaplains. And so I would go up to Boston regularly and teach the new folks. And so it's been wonderful to stay connected with all them as they've gone in and had tours. And it's been very rewarding. Well, I don't think it's as negative. I think people's thought on that has advanced, and I think they realize people are more individual than that you just can't write off a whole sex. That people are different, and that there are some men who get in the military and it works well for them, and there are some women who get in the military and it works well for them. So it's not that different. You do have to be able to meet the requirements, though. You have to do the morning run and all that kind of stuff that they do. And you have a physical training test every 6 months or so, and you have to pass that every time. So it's just, other than that, there's not a lot of things that you can do by the numbers. Not long after I retired, I was asked to speak at one of the few military women chaplains conference. Only about every 5 to 7 years do they have one, and it's always held in the DC area. It was a 3-day series of presentations by well-known women speakers who were civilians or a few service women who were officers. I would be the very last speaker on the 3rd day, just before everybody went off to get in buses and take off to the airport and leave. I was taken back by how edgy and how angry the speakers were in every other talk. All the other women just put their fist up and they were like, "We're not making the progress," and on and on. One woman even raised her fists like that, and I wouldn't even repeat the things she said. My talk was about how I found that only love can truly overcome hate. And it focused on how, as chaplains, we were blessed with the opportunity to apply the truth of the scriptures in our steps, in our tours of service. When I finished the talk, I offered a copy of my book to any of the women chaplains who would want one. Every single woman chaplain said yes, and it was interesting how many of them thanked me because they now felt like they understood how clearly one could go forward in a productive manner and to do that intelligently and lovingly in their future service in the military. So it was a very good time, and I was honored to be a small part of it. It is also good to remember that while change in anything can be made officially, acceptance is only achieved one person at a time and comes much more slowly. What helped me immensely was rising above the human sense to a more spiritual sense of progress. Someday a woman will rise to the highest place of distinction in the Army Chaplain Corps, and that would be the Chief of Chaplains for the Army Chaplain Corps. That's happened in the other branches, but it still today has not even happened for the Army. Perhaps on the day she and others will do that, will recognize that that accomplishment was not only an individual accomplishment, but that the woman who eventually will become a woman chief chaplains, that there was also a concept of a collective accomplishment, because I think it's all the people who go before somebody who's doing something new like that help make that person's accomplishment at the end. It's all part of the accomplishment. I have continued to accept invitations to share my experiences in my book with others, hoping that it will continue to be the source for others to benefit from the experiences that happen. Then perhaps others will recognize, if nothing else, that they were what I wanted to call the book humble beginnings, because I think that's what we've seen with women in the military. The early experiences had a gravity to them that felt akin to taking the front ranks in a military formation or operation. Have you ever run 6.5 miles? And I said, well, we did run 2 miles in basic. And he said, don't worry, there's 60 to 80 people fall out every time. So I prayed with the Bible passage, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles, and they shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. That's Isaiah 40:31. I knew that God would sustain me. I needed to recognize to accomplish anything could only be to God's glory, not mine. At about the 5-mile point, I saw the commander come running from the front of the formation to the rear of the formation where I was. And he asked me if I could run another 1.5 miles. And I said, well, I don't think so, He said, well, come, you're gonna run up front with me. So I nodded and said yes. I remember Mary Baker Eddy makes the statement, whatever it is your duty to do, you can do without harm to yourself. I knew it was right to do my duty and that God would help me. Back in the garrison, when we got back to the main part, because we were way out on the roads by running 6.5 miles, the commander began to do what they call dress down the formation, and he was just hollering at them. And he accused them, some of the soldiers, of doing what they call sandbagging, because significant numbers of people fell out every day when they ran. He said, just because this woman made the run, not one of you men fell out. I'll fix this, he says. I'll run her up here every morning. So, even though it was against regulation at the time to have a woman assigned to infantry, he got me assigned as their chaplain. I always found there were biblical passages and ideas from the Christian Science textbooks by Mary Baker Eddy that were perfect for whatever came to happen in those situations. And from the Bible, Psalm 23, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And from Jeremiah 32:17, God, thou hast made the heaven and the earth by thy great power and stretched out arm, and there is nothing too hard for thee. The next event that occurred was one of the most unusual events I had in my career. I was at a retreat center, because sometimes you'd get put on orders to go to a conference of some sort. So we were out at a conference center in Phoenix, Arizona. It was a bunch of chaplains, and they were from all different installations, so nobody hardly knew each other. I joined the other chaplains for their early morning physical training, which was always a run. And the guys were discussing running out to a little foothill that you could see out behind the retreat center. The male chaplains cautioned me it was too far, but I explained I'd been running 6 to 9 miles with my infantry battalion at Fort Sill. Reluctantly, they agreed that I could do the run. None of us were desert people, so we weren't familiar with the illusion of distances. After about 4 miles of running in the barren desert, it became clear to us it was probably 10 times more distance than it had appeared to be to get out to that foothill. And we realized we had to run back, so we turned around and began to come back. I had been praying to take my mind off the length of that run. All of a sudden, I realized the guys had seen a pack of hungry coyotes coming, and they were looking for their morning breakfast, I think. They had sprinted ahead and climbed into trees and were up on 2 brick walls where someone was just starting on a big new area, but the development wasn't completed at all yet. The coyotes began to growl and circle me. When the lead dog growled and moved in, the others would close in tighter, and then they'd circle again, and the lead dog would growl again, and they'd circle, and they were just closing in on me. There was a wonderful Bible lesson that day. It always strikes me how convenient the Bible passages are in the lesson. And it was from the 13th and 14th chapter of Numbers, and it had an evil report and said it was a land that devoured its people and was inhabited by giants. But Caleb gave a good and true report. Right where the men he journeyed with saw a dangerous situation, Caleb saw a land that flowed with milk and honey and felt that the people were able to possess it. Because I had been praying without ceasing on that run, I felt very prepared during the run. I did sense a gravity to the situation as the circling coyotes began to close in. Next, I recalled the Bible account of Daniel in the lion's den, and I thought Daniel's heart was so pure. There was no fear, no animalistic tendency, no hate, that he had been thrown into that lion's den. There was nothing impure in his heart or mind for the lions to feed on. The thought came to me as I prayed that all the coyotes could feel was that I loved them. I prayed to hear the still small voice of God's word for this situation. What came to me was, get down and speak to the lead coyote. So I got down on one knee and I knelt, and the lead coyote laid down like puppies lay down. Then all the other coyotes laid down. What happened literally was an example of Mark 16:15 that instructs Christian to preach the gospel to every creature. I started with the first chapter of Genesis. Some said that they didn't feel women had earned the opportunity to go to these conferences. Another chaplain said he never thought our church should have been allowed to have military chaplains. Although it seemed as if there was a lot of ravenous thought, it had no voice or authority in the end. This incident gave me the opportunity to share with them that women chaplains didn't want to be the Star-Spangled Barbie doll and sent to all these conferences, but somebody always thought they needed a token woman at all of them, so we get the orders, and as a military, you have to obey your orders. When I returned to my dorm that night, all the women asked me if I was the stupidest person on campus. They remarked that everyone knew he was the biggest drug dealer on the college, and I said, well, I didn't know that. And I had never seen him as a drug dealer. And they said, how is it you wouldn't have seen him as a drug dealer? And I said, because wherever he was in, there were several buildings, where you went to classes, and wherever he was, you always saw this little dog, Missy, outside. And when he finished his course, he would come out. And he would pick up Missy and he would just hold her to his chest and love on her. And I said, that's the man that you are. That's the man you have to be. And I said, God could only send someone who knew that you really weren't a drug dealer too. So that's why I was able to help him. He moved out of the house, stopped immediately, and he just kept looking at his hand, and he gladly agreed to provide the music for our dance. The night of the dance, he kept asking me what I had done to him. I assured him that he was a child of God. I told him God wasn't bounded by limitations. I cited examples from the Bible where Jesus constantly defied material laws. He walked on water, he healed withered limbs, he changed water into wine. And 2 weeks later, it was rather late at night, and this was even before women were allowed to be in the same dorm with men. And he was one of the 4 or 5 people that lived on campus on this church college. He came to the door and demanded that I go with him to where he lived off campus. I listened and felt God assuring me this was truly exceptional case and that I needed to go with him. At his house, he covered a kitchen table with drugs from ingenious hiding places in the floor or in the walls or in different places in the house. Then he tore open all of those packages and flushed thousands of dollars of drugs down the toilet. And he said to me, ever since you stopped that bleeding on my hand, he says, I have not been able to sell them anymore. And again, he was demanding to know what I had done to him. And I said, it came to me to ask him if he could promise to answer one question honestly. He agreed, and I asked him if he wanted to be free of that activity. And he paused, and then he quietly said, well, yes, but there's no way you could have known that. And I said, but you know, God knows everything. And he sent somebody to help you. I explained that one form of prayer was a deep and sincere desire, and that had to be what was coming from his heart. I told him, God knows what's on a man's heart. He obviously had wanted to be free of this immoral activity. He admitted he felt God was telling him he had wasted his life when he heard the Ezekiel passage. When you said you wanted to follow me, did you think I meant only in the easy footsteps? And I said, no, Lord, I will follow you all the way to the cross if that's what's necessary. Instantaneously, any sense of anger was quenched. And another thought came to me. What must a person have been through in order to be able to bring themselves to spit on another human being? My response absolutely turned 180 degrees. I felt a deep sense of compassion and pity for the young man. I reached out and I embraced him. And I repeated that I heard what I heard in my voice and in my head and said, I couldn't imagine what you must have been through in order to be able to bring yourself to spit on another human being. And it seemed to me as if the recognition in his own heart of what he had said in a moment of anger and everything, he got a clear sense of what he had actually said. And it hit him like a brick in the face. You could just see him go like that when I said that. And he fell to his knees and wept and begged me to forgive him. From the time my roommate and I started Chaplain Officer Basic Course, the male chaplains repeatedly told Diana that she would never make it. And they would say, you know, you're black, you got 2 strikes against you, you're black and you're a woman. And for me, they said, you got 2 strikes against you because you're a Christian Scientist and you're a woman, so you'll never make it. Yet we both served long terms and retired with benefits. I was simply standing at a gasoline pump when the male attendant said to me, and he wasn't even a military person, he was just a worker in a military gas station thing. He said, I'm not military, but even I know you can't just waltz into the PX post-exchange clothing and store areas. And he said, and buy that stuff and put it on your hat. So I said, I patiently explained, I really was a chaplain. In the commissary or PX, retirees would stop and stare at you and see the chaplain insignia. And one man asked me when he saw the cross, he said, are you a signal officer? Oh. That baffled me. I pointed out that my cross, that was a cross, and he said, well, I thought that was a telephone pole. So I explained it was a Christian cross and that I was a chaplain. He responded, you mean a chaplain assistant, which would be I patiently explained that assistants weren't enlisted soldiers. Then I informed him that women had been commissioned as chaplain officers since 1974. He just walked away shaking. I was like, okay. Other times people would ask me if I was real. after about the 10th interruption of your shopping, I'd get to the point where I'd laugh and say, no, I'm just a figment of your imagination. That was easier than having to go into detailed explanations over and over and over again. The constant questioning was a little bit like Chinese water torture. Some of the military women react with anger. And like Chinese water torture, it would appear to the person who unknowingly insulted the woman chaplain that she had overreacted. They didn't realize they might have been the 10th or 20th person that day that it had said something insulting. Pretty much not being given the opportunities that a lot of the men were being given. So, but I think the progress comes a step at a time, and so nobody's getting spit on anymore. They're not getting abandoned when coyotes circle them and stuff like that. I mean, the things aren't as strikingly angry as they were in the beginning. And so it just came to me, here's what you're supposed to say. And I felt like I was a scribe. I was just writing as fast as I could because it was coming to my head. And when I got done and I gave this, this is what the invocation was at the dedication of that memorial, and that was in 1997. And so I called it Not for the Recognition. Almighty God, in a gentle presence, look on us today. Help our nation look upon us in a grateful way, celebrating those who served before, leaving only an unsung score. For before us served a blessed few, who served without the recognition due, but did not nor now do the duty done for glory, but for you. For the common good we serve to heal and renew the fighting strength for our beloved red, white, and blue. We did it because we dared to do a duty needing done, regardless of the sacrifice required. The battle must be won. We do and did a work inspired because it was required, not in a quest for earthly rewards, but for the healing, support, and care of fellow soldiers lying there, or needing our efforts side by side to fight for freedom far and wide, that any injustice may not abide, knowing only the recognition divine was for the selfless, unseen goal. May this celebration make a nation whole, who are yet unsure just what's our role. We simply serve for the task at hand, a quiet, sincere, and hallowed band, not for the recognition then nor now. We seek our enduring obligation to the good, the right, a station that advances our nation towards freedom's goal and a purer vision, that they might value women there, a more just record and fair. What further indication do we need that women work and fight and lead, but not for the recognition? Our prayer for women living and deceased, we ask your blessings, grace, and peace. Amen.